A child in silence, a random stranger. A simple gesture in the park sparks a connection powerful enough to transform everything, even the most closed heart. It was late afternoon in Seattle when Emily decided to walk alone through Discovery Park, seeking in the silence of nature a small relief from the weight of her routine. Her steps were slow, her gaze lost among the trees that were already beginning to filter the orange tones of the sky. Taking care of her debilitated grandmother, juggling informal jobs and keeping the bills paid, had left her strength at its limit. It was rare to have a moment just for herself, and that walk wasn't planned, just necessary. She didn't imagine that in that moment of respite, her life was about to change irreversibly. As she headed toward the lookout point, Emily heard a sound that didn't fit the tranquility of the scene, a contained but distressed cry coming from behind a weathered wooden bench. She hesitated, thinking it was some passing conflict between children. But as she approached, she found a girl alone, sitting on the ground with her hands clutching an already worn stuffed rabbit. Her face was dirty with dried tears, and her eyes, still open, seemed to search for something she had already given up finding. Emily crouched instinctively, but didn't say anything immediately. There was in the girl's posture a stiffness of someone who refused to trust. Carefully, Emily sat nearby, not too close. From her bag pocket, she took out a small package of simple cookies, something she carried out of habit. She placed it within the girl's reach without forcing. The silence persisted, but the little one's breathing was no longer so labored. Gradually, with a mix of hesitation and hunger, the child took the cookie. It was a tiny gesture, but powerful. After a few minutes, she approached without saying a word and leaned against Emily's arm. The woman didn't know her name or where she came from, but she embraced her with the care of someone who understands what it is to be afraid and need shelter. What Emily didn't know was that at that moment, a security team was scouring the entire park. The girl wasn't just a lost child. She was Sophie Harrison, the only daughter of Daniel Harrison, one of the country's most influential businessmen. The girl's disappearance, even if only for a few minutes, had mobilized advisors, police, and newspaper headlines. But Emily, oblivious to all this, just listened to the girl's breathing and shared her silence. Minutes later, hurried steps cut through the calm. A tall man in a wrinkled dress shirt and restless gaze appeared in her field of vision. His eyes froze when he saw his daughter in a stranger's arms. He stopped, not knowing whether to advance or retreat, and for a second Emily was also without reaction. But the girl, upon seeing him, only shrank further into Emily, as if that unknown body was already her only anchor. The tension hung in the air, broken only when the man, visibly shaken, confirmed his daughter's name. She responded with a minimal gesture but didn't hug him. The man introduced himself as Daniel, without a last name, without formalities. He thanked her in a restrained manner, but Emily felt there was more behind that look. He offered help, money, a car, anything, but Emily politely refused. She hadn't done anything beyond what any person would do, she said. But he didn't respond. He just watched the girl, still glued to that stranger. 2 days later, Emily received an unexpected call. A woman, very polite, said she was Daniel Harrison's personal assistant and made a formal invitation. He would like to talk in person. Confused and not understanding the reason, Emily refused. But another call came. And then another. Finally, they agreed to meet at a coffee shop in a discreet place. There, Daniel explained, Sophie hadn't communicated with anyone for months. Since her mother had left, the girl had completely shut down. That moment in the park was the first time she had sought comfort in someone. And that someone was Emily. He offered a job proposal, not as just any employer, but as a desperate father. He wanted Emily to take care of Sophie, even if temporarily. He said he trusted few people, but that for the first time in a long while his daughter seemed alive. Emily hesitated. It was too much, too fast. But she thought about her grandmother, the bills, and especially the girl who now had a face, a name, and a look that haunted her dreams. Upon accepting, Emily was taken to a world completely different from hers. Daniel's house was a modern and silent mansion, full of white walls and furniture too expensive to be touched. Everything was too beautiful and too cold. Sophie ran to her when she saw her arrive, a stark contrast to the static environment. In the following days, Emily noticed that the girl smiled only when they were alone. For others, including her father, Sophie remained mute. Emily didn't ask questions. She just offered presence. They painted together, created stories for the stuffed rabbit, and slept side by side when nightmares came. Daniel observed from a distance. Sometimes he appeared at the bedroom door, book in hand, but retreated before being noticed. There was something broken in him too, not a cruel man, but a lost man. The relationship between Emily and Sophie evolved discreetly, until a photograph taken by a paparazzo of Emily tying the girl's shoelace in the park went viral. The headlines were unforgiving. "Billionaire's new nanny," some said. Others went further. The mysterious blonde who caught the CEO's heart through his daughter. Emily was attacked online, labeled, judged. The pressure fell like an avalanche. She decided to leave. Not out of pride, but for protection. She didn't want to be the reason for more pain for the girl. She left a note, said goodbye in silence, and returned to her simple life. Sophie closed herself off again. Daniel, consumed by guilt, did what no one expected. He called the press. On national television, he declared that Emily was not an opportunist nor a gold digger. She was the only person who had brought back his daughter's smile. He said he didn't hire nannies. He trusted human beings, and she had proven to be more than that. Emily watched it all on television. The words weren't dramatic, but true. Her grandmother, listening beside her, just squeezed her hand. 2 days later, Emily knocked again at the door of the white and silent house. There was no party, no celebration, but there were small arms that ran to reach her, and the eyes of a man who, for the first time, seemed to be asking her to stay. The first weeks back in the Harrison mansion felt like walking on eggshells. Emily moved through the pristine hallways with careful steps, always aware that she was a guest in a world that wasn't meant for people like her. The marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that probably cost more than her grandmother's entire house, and every piece of furniture seemed to whisper warnings about not belonging. But whenever doubt crept into her mind, Sophie would appear with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm and that small, fragile smile that made everything else fade into insignificance. Daniel kept his distance those first few weeks, which Emily found both relieving and oddly disappointing. He was a ghost in his own home, appearing briefly for breakfast before disappearing into his study or leaving for the office before dawn. When their paths did cross, he would nod politely, ask if Sophie was doing well, and retreat before Emily could answer, with more than a simple yes. There was a wall between him and the rest of the world, built brick by brick from pain Emily could only guess at. Sophie, however, was slowly coming back to life. It started with small things, humming while they painted, asking Emily to read one more story before bed, laughing when Emily made funny voices for the rabbit they'd named Mr. Whiskers. The girl had begun speaking again, her voice soft and tentative at first, like someone testing whether the world was safe enough to be heard. Emily cherished each word, as if it were made of glass, handling their conversations with gentle care. One morning, Sophie asked about Emily's grandmother. They were sitting in the sunroom, surrounded by coloring books and crayons scattered across the floor like confetti. "Does she live alone?" Sophie asked, not looking up from the picture she was coloring. A garden full of flowers that didn't exist in nature, purple and green and bright orange. "She does now," Emily said carefully. "I used to live with her, but now I'm here with you. Does she miss you?" The question hit harder than Emily expected. She thought about her grandmother's small apartment, the way the radiator clanked in winter, the smell of coffee in the morning, the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other without needing many words. "Yes," she said honestly. "And I miss her too." Sophie finally looked up, her crayon paused mid-stroke. "Can I meet her?" Emily blinked, surprised. "You want to meet my grandmother?" "If that's okay," Sophie said, her voice small again, uncertain. "Mr. Whiskers wants to meet her too." Something warm and painful expanded in Emily's chest. "I think she would love that very much." Getting Daniel's permission turned out to be more complicated than Emily anticipated. She found him in his study late that evening, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep. The room was dark except for the lamp on his desk, casting shadows across his tired face. He looked up when she knocked, and for a moment, Emily saw something raw in his expression before it smoothed into polite attention. "Sophie wants to visit my grandmother," Emily said, getting straight to the point. "I wanted to ask if that would be acceptable." Daniel set down his pen, studying her with those intense eyes that seemed to see more than Emily was comfortable with. "Your grandmother," he repeated. "The one you take care of." "Yes, Sophie asked about her today, and I thought maybe it would be good for her to spend time somewhere different. Somewhere smaller, quieter, more—" Emily searched for the right word. "Normal," Daniel finished, and there was something like longing in his voice. He rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking much older than Emily guessed he was, probably somewhere in his mid-30s. "Yes, that would be fine. Whatever Sophie wants." Emily turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Emily," she looked back, "thank you for everything you're doing for her. I know I don't say it enough." "You don't have to thank me," Emily said softly. "She's easy to care about." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in that carefully maintained wall. Her mother used to say the same thing. It was the first time Daniel had mentioned Sophie's mother directly, and Emily held her breath, afraid that if she moved or spoke, he would retreat back into silence. But he continued, his voice low and rough. "Catherine left almost a year ago. Just packed her things one morning and said she couldn't do it anymore, the pressure, the spotlight, the life. She said she felt like she was disappearing, becoming just an accessory to my success rather than a person in her own right." Emily sat down slowly in the chair across from his desk, sensing that this moment required stillness, required her to just listen. "I was angry at first," Daniel continued, staring at something Emily couldn't see. "Something in the past. Angry that she could just leave Sophie like that, leave us. But then I realized I was angry at myself too. I'd been so focused on building the business, on achieving the next goal, that I'd stopped seeing them. Really seeing them. And by the time I noticed, Catherine was already gone, and Sophie had built these walls around herself that I didn't know how to climb." "She's starting to come down from those walls," Emily said gently. "It just takes time." Daniel's eyes focused back on her, and Emily felt the weight of his gaze. "Because of you. You did in a few weeks what I couldn't do in months." "That's not true. You're her father. She loves you." "She's afraid of me," Daniel said bluntly. "Afraid I'll disappear like her mother did. Afraid I'll choose work over her again. And the terrible thing is, I don't know how to prove to her that I won't. I don't know how to be the father she needs." Emily leaned forward, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Then start small. Read to her before bed. Ask her about her day. Show up. That's all she needs, Daniel. Just show up." He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll try." The visit to Emily's grandmother's apartment happened on a Saturday. Emily was nervous, though she couldn't quite say why. Maybe it was bringing these two parts of her life together, the pristine world of the Harrison mansion and the worn comfort of her grandmother's home. Daniel insisted on driving them himself, dismissing the usual driver, which surprised Emily. Sophie sat in the back seat clutching Mr. Whiskers, unusually quiet. The apartment building was in a modest neighborhood, the paint peeling slightly on the exterior walls, the hallways narrow and dim. Emily saw Daniel taking it all in, and she felt a flash of defensive pride. This place might not be much, but it was full of love, full of life, full of everything that mattered. Her grandmother opened the door before Emily could knock, her face lighting up like sunrise. "There's my girl," she said, pulling Emily into a hug that smelled like lavender and vanilla. Then she looked down at Sophie with warm eyes. "And you must be Sophie. Emily has told me so much about you." Sophie looked up at Emily, seeking permission, and when Emily nodded encouragingly, the girl stepped forward. "I brought Mr. Whiskers to meet you." "Well, isn't he handsome?" Emily's grandmother said seriously, shaking the rabbit's paw with great ceremony. "Please come in, all of you. I made cookies." The afternoon unfolded with surprising ease. Emily's grandmother had a gift for making people feel at home, asking questions that invited conversation without demanding it, filling comfortable silences with stories that made Sophie laugh. Daniel sat on the worn couch, looking both out of place and strangely at peace, watching his daughter come alive in this small, cluttered space. At one point, Emily found Daniel in the kitchen, where she was washing teacups. "Your grandmother is wonderful," he said quietly. "She is," Emily agreed, not looking at him, focusing on the warm water running over her hands. "This is what Sophie needs," Daniel continued. This kind of warmth, this kind of simple happiness. I've given her everything money can buy, but I haven't given her this. Emily dried her hands and turned to face him. They were standing close in the small kitchen, closer than they'd ever been, and she could see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the weight he carried. It's not about money, Daniel. It never was. I'm beginning to understand that, he said, and his voice held something Emily couldn't quite name. You're teaching me that, both of you. Before Emily could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway, her face flushed with happiness. Grandma Rose is teaching me how to make her special lemon cookies. Can we stay a little longer? Daniel smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. As long as you want, Princess. As Emily watched Sophie drag her father back to the living room, saw her grandmother's knowing smile, she felt something shift inside her. This strange, unexpected family they were building, it wasn't what she'd planned, wasn't what any of them had planned. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the best things in life were the ones you never saw coming. Spring arrived in Seattle with its usual hesitation, bringing rain that softened into mist, and occasional bursts of sunshine that made the city feel almost optimistic. Emily had been living in the Harrison mansion for 3 months now, and the rhythms of their unusual household had begun to feel almost normal. Sophie was attending a small private school again, something she'd refused to do for nearly a year, and Emily walked her there each morning, rain or shine. Daniel had kept his promise to show up more. He started joining them for breakfast, reading to Sophie before bed when he wasn't traveling for business. Emily watched their relationship slowly mend, watched Sophie's walls come down brick by careful brick. But she also noticed something else, something that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The way Daniel sometimes looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. The way conversations between them had started lasting longer, drifting into territories that had nothing to do with Sophie. It was a Wednesday evening when things shifted perceptibly. Sophie had a friend from school over for a playdate, squealing with laughter in her room, and Emily was in the kitchen preparing snacks when Daniel came home early. He loosened his tie as he walked in, looking unusually relaxed. Sounds like they're having fun, he said, leaning against the counter as Emily arranged apple slices on a plate. Sophie's been talking about this all week, Emily replied, trying to ignore how aware she was of his presence, how the kitchen suddenly felt smaller. Her friend Mia is apparently the funniest person in their entire class. Daniel smiled, that genuine smile that still surprised Emily whenever it appeared. I never thought I'd see her like this again. Happy, carefree. I'd almost forgotten what her laugh sounded like. She's a resilient kid, Emily said, focusing intently on the apples. She just needed time and space to heal. She needed you, Daniel corrected, his voice dropping lower. We both did. Emily's hand stilled on the knife. The air in the kitchen felt charged, heavy with words that hadn't been spoken. She forced herself to continue cutting, to keep her voice light. I should bring these up to the girls. Emily, wait. Daniel's hand touched her arm gently and she froze. I need to say something, and I don't know how to say it without it sounding wrong or inappropriate. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel it. She turned slowly to face him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Daniel, don't what? Don't tell you that you've become essential to this house, to Sophie, to me. That I look forward to coming home now because I know you'll be here. That somewhere along the way, caring about my daughter turned into caring about you too. The words hung between them, dangerous and thrilling and terrifying all at once. Emily stepped back, putting distance between them. I work for you. I take care of your daughter. That's all this is, all this can be. Is it? Daniel searched her face, and Emily had to look away because she was afraid of what he might see there. Tell me you don't feel it too, this connection between us, and I'll never mention it again. But Emily couldn't tell him that because it would be a lie. She had felt it, this slow-burning awareness of him, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, the way their accidental touches seemed to linger longer than necessary. She'd told herself it was nothing, just gratitude mixing with proximity. But standing here now with his eyes on her, and truth hanging in the balance, she couldn't pretend anymore. What I feel doesn't matter, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Sophie has to come first. She's finally healing, finally trusting again. I won't risk that for anything, not even this. Something like pain flickered across Daniel's face, but he nodded. You're right. Of course you're right. Sophie comes first, always. He stepped back, the moment breaking. I should go change. Tell the girls I'll order pizza for dinner. Emily stood alone in the kitchen long after he'd left, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up the plate of apple slices. She knew she'd done the right thing, the only thing possible. But that knowledge didn't stop the ache spreading through her chest, didn't stop her from wondering what might have been if their circumstances were different. The next few weeks were carefully polite. Daniel and Emily moved around each other like dancers, who knew the steps but were trying not to touch, maintaining proper distance, keeping their conversations focused solely on Sophie. If Sophie noticed the new tension, she didn't mention it, too wrapped up in her own world of school and friends and the simple joys of childhood. But Emily noticed. She noticed the way Daniel's jaw tightened when their hands accidentally brushed passing Sophie's lunchbox. She noticed how he left rooms shortly after she entered them. She noticed the weight of unspoken words that seemed to fill every silence. And she noticed her own longing, the way she caught herself listening for his footsteps, watching for his car in the driveway, finding excuses to stay up later in case he wanted to talk. It was unsustainable, this careful dance, and Emily knew it. Something would have to give. The breaking point came on a rainy Saturday. Sophie had gone to a birthday party, picked up by Mia's parents, leaving Emily and Daniel alone in the house for the first time since their conversation in the kitchen. Emily tried to stay in her room, giving Daniel space, but after an hour of staring at the walls, she ventured downstairs to make tea. She found Daniel in the living room, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching rain streak down the glass. He turned when he heard her footsteps, and the look on his face made her breath catch. "We can't keep doing this," he said without preamble. "This avoiding each other, pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's exhausting, and it's not fair to Sophie either." Emily stayed in the doorway, maintaining distance. "What do you suggest?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Maybe I was wrong to say anything. Maybe I should have just kept it to myself. But I've spent so much of my life pretending, building walls, keeping people at arm's length to protect myself, and I'm tired. I'm so tired of being alone in a house full of people." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in Emily's chest. Against her better judgment, she walked into the room, stopping a few feet away from him. "You're not alone, Daniel. Sophie and I are here. That hasn't changed." "But it has changed," he said, looking at her with those intense eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. "Everything changed the moment I admitted how I feel. And now we're both trying to pretend we can go back to how things were, but we can't. The words are out there. The truth is out there." "The truth is complicated," Emily said, wrapping her arms around herself. "The truth is that I care about you, probably more than I should. The truth is that sometimes I imagine what it would be like if I weren't just Sophie's caregiver, if I were something more in this family. But the truth is also that I'm terrified of ruining what we have, of hurting Sophie, of becoming just another person who lets you both down." Daniel closed the distance between them, moving slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, he reached out and gently took her hand. "You could never let us down. Don't you see that? You're the only person who's ever stayed. The only person who's seen us at our worst and chose to stay anyway." "I'm not her mother," Emily said, the words tumbling out, giving voice to the fear that had been haunting her. "I could never replace Catherine. Sophie might think she wants me here now, but what happens when she's older and realizes I was just the help who her father got involved with? What happens when she resents me for not being her real mother?" "Catherine left," Daniel said firmly, his grip on her hand tightening. "She made her choice, and I've stopped questioning it. But you, Emily, you chose to stay. You chose us every single day. That means something. That means everything." Emily wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself fall into this feeling, into the possibility of something real and lasting. But fear held her back, fear of all the ways this could go wrong, all the ways she could hurt the people she'd come to love. "I need time," she said finally. "I need to think about what's best for Sophie, what's best for all of us. This isn't just about what we want. There's a little girl whose happiness depends on us making the right choices." Daniel nodded slowly, though disappointment clouded his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. Neither is Sophie. We're not going to push you away, Emily. You're stuck with us now, whatever you decide." He released her hand and stepped back, and Emily felt the loss of his warmth like a physical ache. As he left the room, she stayed by the windows, watching the rain and wondering how something that felt so right could also feel so impossibly complicated. She thought about Sophie's laugh, about Daniel's rare smiles, about her grandmother's wise words about taking chances on happiness, even when it scared you. The question wasn't whether she wanted this. The question was whether she was brave enough to reach for it, brave enough to risk her heart on a family that had already been broken once. The rain continued to fall, offering no answers, only the steady rhythm of water against glass and the echo of her own uncertain heart. Emily woke the next morning to sounds of commotion downstairs. Glancing at her clock, she saw it was barely 7, too early for Sophie to be up on a Sunday. She pulled on her robe and hurried down the stairs, following the voices to the foyer where Daniel stood facing a woman Emily had never seen before, but somehow instantly recognized. Catherine Harrison was everything Emily had imagined, and nothing like she'd expected. Tall and elegant, with dark hair swept into a perfect chignon, wearing designer clothes that probably cost more than Emily made in a month, she stood in the marble entryway like she still owned the place. But there was something brittle in her posture, something desperate in her eyes that made Emily pause on the stairs. "You can't just show up here unannounced after a year," Daniel was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "You gave up that right when you left." "She's my daughter," Catherine said, and her voice cracked on the word daughter. "I made a mistake, Daniel. I know that now. I was lost and confused, and I thought leaving would help me find myself, but all it did was make me realize what I'd lost. I want to see Sophie. I want to try to make things right. You think you can just walk back into her life after abandoning her? After breaking her heart?" Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Do you have any idea what the past year has been like for her?" She stopped talking, Catherine. She stopped smiling. "She built walls so high I couldn't reach her." "That's why I'm here," Catherine said, taking a step forward. "I want to help tear those walls down. I'm her mother. She needs me." "She needed you a year ago," Daniel shot back. "Now she has Emily." Catherine's eyes finally found Emily on the stairs, and Emily felt the weight of that assessing gaze, measuring her, judging her. "The nanny," Catherine said, and something in her tone made Emily's spine stiffen. "Yes, I've read about her. About you. The mysterious woman who captured my family's attention. How convenient." "Emily is not just a nanny," Daniel said, his voice dropping dangerously low. "She's the person who put our daughter back together when you shattered her. She's the one who showed up every single day, who earned Sophie's trust through patience and genuine care. So don't you dare dismiss her like she's nothing." The fierceness in Daniel's defense warmed Emily, even as the situation terrified her. This was Sophie's mother, the woman who'd given birth to her, who had every legal right to see her daughter. No matter how much Emily cared about Sophie, she couldn't compete with that bond. "I'm not trying to dismiss anyone," Catherine said, softening her tone. "I'm sure she's been wonderful with Sophie. But I'm her mother, Daniel. I have rights. If you don't let me see her voluntarily, I'll get a court order." "Is that really what you want?" "A legal battle that will hurt Sophie even more." Daniel looked torn, anger and protectiveness and old pain warring across his face. Emily descended the stairs slowly, drawing both their attention. "Maybe," she said quietly, "we should think about what Sophie wants. She's not a possession to be fought over. She's a little girl who's been through enough trauma." Catherine studied Emily with new interest, reassessing. "You're right," she admitted. "I apologize. This isn't about what Daniel and I want. It's about Sophie." She turned back to Daniel. "Please, just let me see her. Let me try to explain. If she doesn't want to see me again after that, I'll respect her decision. But I need to try." Daniel looked at Emily, a silent question in his eyes, and Emily realized he was asking for her opinion, trusting her judgment. It was both empowering and terrifying. Emily thought about Sophie, about how much progress she'd made, about how fragile that progress still was. But she also thought about the questions Sophie would have as she grew older. Questions about her mother, and why she left, and whether she ever thought about coming back. "It's your decision," Emily said to Daniel. "But maybe Sophie deserves the chance to get answers, even if they're not the answers she wants." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. "Fine, but I'm there the whole time. And if Sophie gets upset or asks you to leave, You leave immediately. No arguments. Of course, Catherine agreed quickly. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you both. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, holding Mr. Whiskers, her hair tousled from sleep. What's all the noise? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Then she looked down and saw Catherine, and her entire body went rigid. The silence that followed was excruciating. Catherine's face transformed with longing and regret and desperate hope. Sophie's expression was unreadable, frozen somewhere between shock and something Emily couldn't identify. Emily wanted to run up the stairs and gather Sophie in her arms, protect her from whatever pain this moment might bring. "Hi, baby," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "I know I'm the last person you expected to see. I know I hurt you. But I wanted to come and tell you that I'm sorry. So sorry." Sophie didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at the woman who'd given birth to her, the woman who'd left her, and Emily watched emotions flicker across the child's face too quickly to name. Finally, Sophie looked at Emily, a silent plea in her eyes. Emily climbed the stairs and knelt beside Sophie, speaking softly. "It's okay to feel however you're feeling right now. Confused, angry, scared, all of it. Your mom wants to talk to you, but only if you want to. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." "Why did she come back?" Sophie whispered, her voice small and lost. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe you could ask her. Or maybe you need more time to think about it. There's no wrong answer here." Sophie looked down at Mr. Whiskers, then back at Catherine. "I want Emily to stay with me," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "If I talk to her, Emily has to be there." Catherine's face flickered with something that might have been jealousy or hurt, but she nodded. "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." They ended up in the sunroom, Sophie's favorite space in the house. Sophie sat on the couch between Emily and Daniel, creating a protective barrier, while Catherine took the chair across from them. The morning light streaming through the windows felt too bright for such a heavy conversation. Catherine started talking, explaining how she'd felt suffocated by the lifestyle, by the constant scrutiny, by feeling like she was losing herself. She talked about therapy and self-discovery, and realizing too late what she'd given up. She talked about missing Sophie every single day, about following news about the family online, about finally gathering the courage to come back. Sophie listened without speaking, her hand gripping Emily's tightly. Emily could feel the tremors running through the small body beside her, the effort it took for Sophie to just sit there and hear these words. Daniel's jaw was clenched so tight, Emily worried he might crack a tooth, his own hand resting protectively on Sophie's shoulder. When Catherine finally stopped talking, Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, voice steady but cold in a way Emily had never heard from her before, "You chose to leave me. Emily chose to stay. That's all I need to know." The words hit like a bomb. Catherine's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Sophie, please, I know I made terrible mistakes, but I want to make it up to you. I want to be your mother again." "You're not my mother anymore," Sophie said, each word deliberate and cutting. "Emily is." She turned to Emily, and Emily saw tears streaming down Sophie's face too, but her voice didn't waver. "Emily stayed when I was sad. Emily stayed when I couldn't talk. Emily stayed when everything was hard. You left when things got difficult. That's the difference." Emily's throat closed with emotion. She wanted to tell Sophie that it wasn't that simple, that biological bonds mattered, that Catherine deserved a chance to prove she'd changed. But looking into Sophie's eyes, she saw a child who'd made a choice, who'd decided where her loyalty lay, and Emily couldn't bring herself to undermine that, no matter how complicated it made everything. "I think that's enough for today," Daniel said, standing. His voice was gentle but firm. "Catherine, I appreciate you coming and trying to explain, but Sophie has spoken, and I think we need to respect her feelings. If she changes her mind in the future, we can talk about visitation. But for now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Catherine looked like she wanted to argue, to fight, to demand her rights. But perhaps she saw something in Sophie's face, or in Daniel's protective stance, or in Emily's quiet support that made her realize this was a battle she couldn't win. Not today. She stood slowly, wiping at her tears. "I understand," she said quietly. "But I'm not giving up, Sophie. I'll wait as long as it takes for you to forgive me. I love you. I always have, even when I was too confused to show it properly." Sophie didn't respond, just burrowed deeper into Emily's side. Catherine left with Daniel escorting her to the door, leaving Emily alone with a quietly sobbing child. Emily held Sophie close, stroking her hair, letting her cry out all the complicated feelings that the morning had brought. "Did I do the wrong thing?" Sophie asked eventually, her voice muffled against Emily's shoulder. "She's my mom. I should want her back, but I don't. I don't want anything to change. I want it to stay like this, with you and Dad and me." "You didn't do anything wrong," Emily assured her, though her own heart was breaking for everyone involved, even Catherine. "You told the truth about how you feel, and that's always the right thing to do. But Sophie, feelings can change. Maybe someday you'll want to know your mom again, and that's okay too. Do you want her to come back?" Sophie pulled back to look at Emily, her eyes red and searching. Emily chose her words carefully. "I want whatever is best for you. If having Catherine in your life would make you happy, then I want that. If you need more time, or if you decide you don't want that right now, then I want that too. This isn't about what I want. It's about you. But you're not going to leave, right?" Sophie's voice was small, afraid. "Even if my mom comes back, you'll still be here." Emily looked into those trusting eyes and made a promise she prayed she could keep. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise." As she held Sophie close, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Catherine's return had changed everything, had introduced a complication that would force all of them to confront questions they'd been avoiding. And somewhere in the house, she could hear Daniel's footsteps, pacing. And she wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling, and whether their careful dance around their growing feelings could survive this new reality. The days following Catherine's visit felt like walking through fog. Sophie clung to Emily more than usual, waking with nightmares that had Emily sleeping on the floor beside her bed more nights than not. The girl's hard-won progress seemed fragile again, like a vase that had been glued back together, but might shatter at the slightest knock. Emily found herself exhausted, emotionally wrung out from being Sophie's anchor, while her own feelings churned in confusion. Daniel threw himself into work with renewed intensity, leaving early and returning late, as if Catherine's appearance had reminded him of everything he'd lost and everything he stood to lose again. When he was home, he was attentive to Sophie but distant with Emily, that careful politeness back in full force. Emily told herself it was for the best, that the complication of Catherine's return had made it clear why crossing professional boundaries would be a mistake. But knowing something intellectually didn't stop the ache in her chest when Daniel avoided her eyes. It was Emily's grandmother who finally called her out on it. Rose had started coming to the mansion once a week for tea, an arrangement that delighted Sophie and gave Emily a lifeline to her old world. They were in the kitchen, Sophie at her piano lesson in another part of the house, when Rose set down her teacup with a decisive clink and fixed Emily with a knowing look. "All right, girl." "Spill it. What's eating at you?" Emily tried to smile to pretend everything was fine, but Rose had known her too long. "It's complicated, Grandma." "Life usually is," Rose said dryly, "but you've been looking like someone carrying the weight of the world on those skinny shoulders of yours. And don't think I haven't noticed the way that man looks at you when you're not watching, or the way you light up when he walks into a room and then dim yourself down like you're not allowed to feel it." Heat flooded Emily's cheeks. "You noticed that?" "I'm old, not blind," Rose said with a gentle smile. "So what's stopping you? And don't tell me it's just about Sophie, because that child adores you and wants you happy." Emily sank into the chair across from her grandmother, finally letting the weight show. "His ex-wife came back, Catherine. She wants to be in Sophie's life again, and I think maybe she wants Daniel back too, though she hasn't said it directly. And who am I to stand in the way of that? They're a family. I'm just the person who happened to be there when things fell apart." "You're the person who put them back together," Rose corrected firmly. "There's a big difference, and from what you've told me, Catherine made her choice when she walked out that door. The question is, what choice are you going to make? Yes, what if I choose wrong? What if I let myself care about Daniel, really? Care about him and it ruins everything? Sophie would be caught in the middle. She's already been through so much." Rose reached across the table and took Emily's hand. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way, sweetheart. Fear is a terrible compass. It'll keep you safe, sure, but it'll also keep you from ever really living. Your grandfather, God rest him, was everything I never knew I needed. But I almost didn't marry him because I was scared. Scared of getting hurt. Scared of change. Scared of all the ways it could go wrong. My own mother had to shake some sense into me. What did she say? She said that the only thing scarier than taking a chance on love is looking back years later and realizing you were too afraid to try. Rose squeezed Emily's hand. That man in there is falling for you if he hasn't fallen already. And you're falling for him too. The only question is whether you're brave enough to catch each other. Before Emily could respond, Daniel appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, he said, looking uncomfortable. Catherine's lawyer just called. She's filing for joint custody. The hearing is in 3 weeks. The words landed like stones in water, sending ripples through everything. Rose stood, sensing the private nature of what needed to be discussed. I should check on Sophie. Say how the piano lesson's going. She squeezed Emily's shoulder as she passed. Remember what I said, girl. Don't let fear make your choices for you. When they were alone, Daniel leaned against the counter, suddenly looking every bit as exhausted as Emily felt. I should have expected this. Catherine doesn't give up easily once she sets her mind to something. What does your lawyer say? Emily asked. That she has rights as Sophie's mother regardless of the past year, that the court will likely grant her at least some visitation, probably supervised at first. But given Sophie's reaction, they'll take her wishes into account too. He rubbed his face with both hands. This is going to be a mess, Emily. Court dates, evaluations, probably a custody evaluator interviewing everyone in Sophie's life, including you. The implication hung between them. Emily would be scrutinized, questioned about her role in the household, about her relationship with Sophie and with Daniel. Any hint of impropriety could be used against them, could potentially hurt Daniel's case. Maybe I should step back, Emily heard herself say, even though the words felt like swallowing glass. Just temporarily, until this is resolved. If Catherine's lawyer finds out about us, about how we feel, they could twist it. Make it look like Sophie's replacing her mother with me, like you're moving on inappropriately fast. There is no us, Daniel said, and the words were like a slap, even though Emily knew he was just stating facts. You made sure of that. You put up walls to protect Sophie, and you were right to do it. But now you're offering to leave entirely, and I can't let you do that. Sophie needs you, especially now. And what about what you need? The question escaped before Emily could stop it, raw and honest and dangerous. Daniel's eyes found hers, and the intensity there made Emily's breath catch. What I need is complicated. What I need is standing right in front of me, but completely out of reach. What I need is the impossible situation of wanting you to stay while knowing that wanting you at all makes everything harder. They stared at each other across the kitchen, years of loneliness and longing, and carefully maintained distance cracking between them. Emily wanted to cross that space, wanted to tell him that impossible wasn't the same as wrong, that complicated didn't mean they shouldn't try. But the sound of Sophie's laughter drifting from the other room reminded her of what was at stake. I'll stay, Emily said finally, but we need to be careful, for the custody hearing, for Sophie, for everything. Whatever this is between us, it has to wait. It's always waiting, Daniel said quietly. The question is whether we'll still be brave enough to reach for it when the waiting is done. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Daniel's lawyer, a sharp woman named Margaret Chen, interviewed Emily extensively about her role in Sophie's life, about the girl's progress, about the daily routines that had helped Sophie heal. Emily was painfully honest, holding nothing back except the feelings she harbored for Daniel, the way her heart had become entangled with this family. Catherine requested supervised visits, and after much discussion, Daniel agreed. Emily stayed away during these visits, giving Catherine space to try to rebuild her relationship with Sophie, even though it felt like swallowing nails every time. Sophie reported back with clinical detachment, describing the visits like she was recounting a homework assignment. Catherine brought gifts, planned activities, tried too hard. Sophie remained polite but distant, a stranger visiting with a stranger. The custody evaluator, Dr. Patricia Morrison, was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who seemed to see everything. She interviewed Sophie alone, then with Daniel, then with Emily. She visited the house, observed their interactions, asked questions that felt both gentle and invasive. Emily felt exposed under that knowing gaze. worried that Dr. Morrison could see all the feelings Emily tried so hard to hide. "Sophie clearly sees you as a maternal figure," Dr. Morrison observed during one of their sessions. "That kind of attachment doesn't form overnight. You've done remarkable work with her." "I just showed up," Emily said honestly. That's all she needed. Someone who would consistently be there. "And yet her biological mother is now trying to show up too," Dr. Morrison noted. "How does that make you feel?" Emily chose her words carefully. "I feel protective of Sophie. I want what's best for her, whatever that looks like. If that means building a relationship with Catherine, then I support that. If it means maintaining distance, I support that too. My role isn't to replace her mother. It's to be whatever Sophie needs me to be." Dr. Morrison studied her thoughtfully. "That's a very diplomatic answer, but I'm not asking about your role. I'm asking about your feelings. This situation must be difficult for you personally." Emily felt tears prick her eyes, surprising herself. "It is difficult," she admitted, "because I've come to love Sophie like she was my own, and watching her have to choose between the mother who left and the person who stayed, watching her be put in that impossible position, breaks my heart. She shouldn't have to choose. She should be allowed to just be a child, to be secure in the knowledge that the adults in her life will figure it out without putting that burden on her." Something softened in Dr. Morrison's expression. "You really do love her, don't you?" "With everything I have," Emily said simply. The day of the hearing arrived grey and drizzly, Seattle weather matching the mood. Emily helped Sophie get dressed in a pretty blue dress that she'd picked out herself, braiding her hair with shaking fingers. Sophie was unusually quiet, her face pale and drawn. "I don't want to choose," Sophie whispered as Emily finished the second braid. "The judge is going to make me choose, isn't he?" Emily turned Sophie around to face her, kneeling so they were eye level. "You don't have to choose between people you love, sweetheart. The judge just wants to understand what makes you feel safe and happy. Just tell the truth about what you want, and the adults will figure out the rest. What if what I want isn't allowed?" Sophie's eyes were huge with worry. "What if they say I have to spend time with my mom even though I don't want to? Or what if they say you can't live here anymore because you're not really family?" Emily's heart clenched. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. You, me, and your dad. We're a team, remember?" Sophie threw her arms around Emily's neck, holding on tight. "I wish you were my real mom. Then no one could take you away." Emily held her close, tears threatening. "No one is taking me anywhere. I promise you that, no matter what happens in that courthouse today." Daniel appeared in the doorway wearing a dark suit that made him look severe and untouchable. But when he saw Sophie in Emily's arms, his expression softened. "Ready to go, princess?" Sophie pulled back and nodded bravely, taking both Emily's and Daniel's hands. As they walked to the car together, Emily thought about Rose's words, about fear and courage and taking chances. The hearing today would determine Sophie's future, would set the parameters of how this complicated family would function going forward. But Emily realized that regardless of what the judge decided, she'd already made her choice. She'd chosen this family, chosen this little girl, chosen to be brave enough to love them both even knowing she could lose everything. The question now was whether love would be enough to carry them through whatever came next. The courthouse was everything Emily expected: imposing grey stone, echoing hallways, the smell of old paper and anxiety. They sat on hard benches outside the courtroom, Daniel's leg bouncing with nervous energy. Sophie pressed against Emily's side, clutching Mr. Whiskers like a lifeline. Catherine arrived with her lawyer, a polished man in an expensive suit who looked like he won cases by intimidation. She tried to smile at Sophie, but the girl looked away. Margaret Chen, Daniel's attorney, briefed them one final time. "Judge Reynolds is fair but thorough. She'll review Dr. Morrison's evaluation, hear testimony from both sides, and likely speak with Sophie privately. Just be honest and stay calm." When they were called in, the courtroom felt cavernous. Judge Reynolds was a black woman in her 60s, with kind eyes but a stern mouth that suggested she didn't tolerate games. Emily sat in the gallery behind Daniel, not part of the proceedings but present in support. Catherine sat across the aisle with her lawyer, and Emily felt the woman's eyes on her several times, assessing, calculating. The hearing began with formalities, establishing facts about the separation, Catherine's absence, the current custody arrangement. Then Catherine's lawyer stood to make his case. He painted a picture of a woman who'd been suffering from postpartum issues that had gone undiagnosed for years, who'd needed space to heal, but had always loved her daughter. He talked about Catherine's therapy, her stability now, her genuine desire to rebuild her relationship with Sophie. "My client made mistakes," the lawyer acknowledged. "She's the first to admit that. But she's done the work to address her mental health, and she's ready to be the mother Sophie deserves. Every child needs their mother, Your Honor. Ms. Harrison simply needs the opportunity to prove she's changed." Margaret Chen countered with Sophie's perspective. With testimony about the girl's trauma after Catherine left, her slow healing, her expressed preference to maintain her current living situation. She called Dr. Morrison to testify, and the evaluator's assessment was measured but clear. Sophie was thriving in her current environment and showed significant anxiety about increased contact with Catherine. Then Catherine herself took the stand, and Emily had to admit she was compelling. She spoke honestly about her struggles, about feeling lost in the shadow of Daniel's success, about making the terrible mistake of leaving when what she should have done was ask for help. She cried when talking about missing Sophie, about regretting every day of the past year, about desperately wanting a chance to make amends. "I know I can't erase what I did," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "I know Sophie is angry with me, and she has every right to be. But she's my daughter. I carried her, I gave birth to her, I loved her for the first 7 years of her life. That bond doesn't just disappear because I made terrible choices. I'm asking for a chance to prove I can be the mother she needs, even if it's just a few hours a week at first." Emily found herself feeling unexpectedly sympathetic. Catherine wasn't a monster. She was a woman who'd been drowning and had made desperate, destructive choices. Emily understood that feeling, understood how easy it was to lose yourself in circumstances beyond your control. But understanding Catherine's pain didn't change the fact that Sophie had been collateral damage. Then Catherine's lawyer called Daniel to the stand, and the tone shifted. He asked about Daniel's work schedule, about how much time he actually spent with Sophie versus how much Emily spent with her. He asked about Emily's qualifications, her background, painting a picture of a desperate man who'd essentially outsourced parenting to an unqualified stranger. "Isn't it true, Mr. Harrison, that you hired Ms. Walker within days of meeting her, with no background check, no references, solely because your daughter seemed to respond to her?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I hired Emily because she was the first person who could reach Sophie after months of isolation. And yes, I trusted my gut on that decision. It was the best decision I've ever made." "You trusted your gut," the lawyer repeated. And how much of that gut instinct was influenced by Ms. Walker's appearance? By perhaps a growing personal interest that went beyond professional concern for your daughter? Margaret Chen objected, but the seed was planted. Emily felt her face burn as the lawyer continued, suggesting without quite stating that Daniel's judgment had been compromised by attraction, that Emily was potentially taking advantage of a vulnerable man and child. When it was Margaret's turn, she called Emily to the stand. Emily's palms were sweating as she swore to tell the truth, hyper-aware of everyone's eyes on her. Margaret's questions were straightforward. How did she meet Sophie? What was their daily routine? How would she describe Sophie's emotional state now versus when they first met? Emily answered honestly, describing the withdrawn child she'd found in the park and the vibrant little girl Sophie had become. She talked about bedtime stories and painting sessions, about nightmares conquered and fears faced, about the slow, patient work of helping a child learn to trust again. Then Catherine's lawyer stood for cross-examination, and Emily braced herself. "Ms. Walker, you're not a trained therapist or child psychologist, correct?" "No, I'm not." "Not a licensed childcare professional?" "No. In fact, before meeting the Harrisons, you were working odd jobs and caring for your elderly grandmother. No formal training in child development at all." "That's correct. And yet you felt qualified to step into this child's life to essentially replace her mother." Emily kept her voice steady. "I never tried to replace anyone. I just tried to be present for a child who needed someone. How convenient that being present came with a substantial salary and luxury accommodations. Much better than your grandmother's small apartment, I imagine." The insinuation stung, but Emily refused to react. "The money was never why I stayed. I stayed because Sophie needed stability, and I could provide that. Or perhaps you stayed because you saw an opportunity. A wealthy, recently separated man. A vulnerable child who could give you access to a lifestyle you'd never otherwise have. He leaned forward. Tell me, Ms. Walker, are you in love with Daniel Harrison? The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Emily felt Daniel's eyes on her, felt Sophie's wide-eyed stare, felt Catherine's sharp attention. This was the moment, the truth she'd been avoiding, the admission that could change everything. I care deeply about Daniel, Emily said slowly, choosing her words carefully, and about Sophie. They've become like family to me, but my relationship with them has always been about what they need, not what I want. Everything I've done has been for Sophie's well-being. That's not what I asked, the lawyer pressed. Are you in love with Daniel Harrison? Yes or no? Emily looked at the judge, at Margaret's warning expression, at Daniel's tense posture. Then she looked at Sophie, who was watching her with those trusting eyes, and Emily knew she couldn't lie, not even to protect them. Yes, she said quietly. I am. But that doesn't change the fact that I've always put Sophie first. It doesn't change anything I've done for her or with her. My feelings for Daniel developed naturally over months of watching him try so hard to be a good father, over seeing him struggle and grow and show up for his daughter every single day. But I've never acted on those feelings. I've never compromised Sophie's care or well-being for my own wants. The admission seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Catherine looked triumphant. Margaret looked resigned. Daniel looked stunned. And Sophie, Emily realized with a sinking heart, looked confused and a little scared. Catherine's lawyer smiled. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Reynolds called for a recess and Emily fled to the bathroom, her hands shaking. She'd just potentially ruined everything, had given Catherine's lawyer exactly what he needed to paint her as an opportunist. Margaret found her there leaning against the sink. That was either very brave or very foolish, Margaret said, not unkindly. Probably both. I couldn't lie, Emily said. Not under oath, and not with Sophie watching. She deserves honesty even when it's complicated. Judge Reynolds will want to speak with Sophie now, Margaret said, in her chambers privately. And Emily, whatever happens next, you did good work with that girl. Don't forget that. Sophie was gone for 30 minutes. Emily paced the hallway, unable to sit, unable to think about anything except what Sophie might be saying, how her admission might have affected the girl's testimony. Daniel stood at the window, his back rigid, and Emily didn't approach him. What could she say? She'd just admitted in open court that she'd fallen for him while living in his house and caring for his child. It looked exactly like what Catherine's lawyer had suggested. Opportunistic, inappropriate, compromising. When Sophie emerged from the judge's chambers, her face was blotchy from crying. She ran straight to Emily, and Emily caught her, holding tight while Sophie sobbed into her shoulder. Over Sophie's head, Emily saw Margaret's slight nod. Whatever Sophie had said, it hadn't hurt their case. Judge Reynolds called them back in, and Emily returned to her seat in the gallery, Sophie still holding her hand tightly until she had to let go. The judge looked at all of them with an expression Emily couldn't read. This is a complicated situation, Judge Reynolds began, made more complicated by the genuine care all the adults in this room seem to have for this child. Mrs. Harrison, I believe you love your daughter and regret your choices. Mr. Harrison, I believe you're doing your best to be a good father. Ms. Walker, I believe your care for Sophie is genuine, regardless of your personal feelings for Mr. Harrison. Emily held her breath, waiting. However, my job isn't to judge the adults. It's to determine what's in Sophie's best interest. And having reviewed Dr. Morrison's evaluation, and having spoken extensively with Sophie herself, I've reached a decision. She looked directly at Sophie. Sophie is a remarkably articulate child who knows her own mind. She's expressed a clear preference to maintain her current living arrangement, with her father as primary custodian and Ms. Walker as her primary caregiver. Catherine made a small sound of protest, but the judge continued. However, Mrs. Harrison does have parental rights, and Sophie would benefit from eventually rebuilding that relationship on her own terms. I'm granting Mr. Harrison full physical custody, with Mrs. Harrison receiving supervised visitation twice monthly for the next 6 months. At that point, we'll reconvene to assess whether increased visitation is appropriate, based on how the relationship develops. Relief flooded through Emily. so intense she felt dizzy. Catherine was crying quietly, her lawyer speaking to her in low tones. Daniel's face showed cautious relief, but Judge Reynolds wasn't done. "Ms. Walker," she said, and Emily's attention snapped back. "Sophie has made it abundantly clear that you are essential to her sense of security and happiness. However, given your admitted feelings for Mr. Harrison and the optics of this situation, I'm recommending that you undergo formal training in child development and potentially pursue certification as a professional caregiver. This will protect everyone involved by ensuring clear boundaries and professional standards." "Of course, Your Honor," Emily said immediately. "Whatever is needed." "Good." Judge Reynolds' expression softened slightly. "I'll be frank. What I saw in that evaluation report and what Sophie told me today describes a child who's been given exactly what she needed by someone who genuinely cares. Don't lose that, Ms. Walker, but do protect it by making sure everything remains above board, especially as your relationship with Mr. Harrison evolves." As they left the courthouse, Sophie between them holding both their hands, Emily felt the weight of the judge's words. Her admission had been noted, acknowledged, and in some ways sanctioned by the court's recommendations. There was no more hiding how she felt, no more pretending this was just a professional arrangement. The truth was out, and now they all had to figure out what to do with it. The drive home from the courthouse was silent except for Sophie's quiet sniffling. Emily sat in the back with her, holding her hand while Sophie processed everything that had happened. The girl had been so brave in that courtroom, so articulate and clear about what she wanted, but Emily could see the toll it had taken. By the time they pulled into the driveway, Sophie was asleep against Emily's shoulder, exhausted from the emotional weight of the day. Daniel carried Sophie up to her room, and Emily followed, helping remove her shoes and tucking her under the covers. They stood on opposite sides of the bed for a moment, watching the girl sleep, both lost in their own thoughts. When they finally left the room, pulling the door mostly closed, they found themselves alone in the hallway with the truth hanging heavy between them. "We should talk," Daniel said quietly. "Yes," Emily agreed, though her stomach twisted with anxiety. "We should." They went to his study, that same room where he'd first confessed his feelings all those weeks ago. Daniel poured himself a drink, offered one to Emily, who shook her head. He stood by the window, his back to her, tension evident in every line of his body. "You told the truth today," he said finally. "Under oath, in front of everyone. You admitted you love me." "I couldn't lie," Emily said. "Not there, not about that. I'm sorry if it made things harder." Daniel turned to face her, and the look in his eyes made Emily's breath catch. "Don't apologize for telling the truth." "God, Emily, do you know how long I've wanted to hear you say that? How many nights I've lain awake wondering if you felt even a fraction of what I feel." "Daniel." "No, let me finish." He set down his glass and crossed to her, close enough that Emily could see the flecks of gold in his eyes. "You've been holding back, keeping distance, being so careful to do what's right that you wouldn't let yourself even consider what you wanted. And I understood that. I respected it. But now the truth is out there, and I need to know. Do you still want to keep pretending? Do you still want to keep this distance between us?" Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment, the choice Rose had talked about, the courage she needed to find. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Terrified of messing this up, of hurting Sophie, of not being enough for either of you. You come from a completely different world than me, Daniel. I'm not sophisticated or polished or used to this lifestyle. What if I'm just someone you turn to because I was there when you needed someone?" Daniel reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch sending electricity through her. "You think you're not enough? Emily, you're everything. You walked into our lives when we were both drowning, and you taught us how to breathe again. You showed me what it means to show up, to be present, to put someone else's needs before your own agenda. You gave my daughter back her smile, her voice, her trust in the world. And somewhere along the way, you gave me hope that I could be more than just the broken man Catherine left behind." Tears slipped down Emily's cheeks. "I didn't do anything special. I just cared." "That's exactly what made it special," Daniel said, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You just cared, without expecting anything in return, without an agenda or conditions. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" His voice dropped lower, rougher. "I fell in love with you watching you read to Sophie, watching you paint with her, watching you hold her through nightmares, watching you be exactly what we both needed, without even trying. And I've been fighting it because I thought I should. Because I thought it was too soon or too complicated or inappropriate. But Emily, life is complicated. Love is complicated. And I'm tired of fighting it. What are you saying? Emily whispered, though her heart already knew. I'm saying I love you. I'm saying I want you to stay. Not as an employee, not as just Sophie's caregiver, but as part of our family. Really part of it. I'm saying I want to build a life with you, if you'll have us. Both of us. Emily looked into his eyes and saw her future there, saw possibility and promise and the kind of love she'd thought existed only in stories. But she also saw Sophie sleeping upstairs, the little girl who'd become her whole world. Sophie has to come first, Emily said firmly. Always. We can't do this if it's going to confuse her or make her feel like she's losing me to you or losing you to me. She's been through enough. Sophie told the judge today that she wishes you were her real mother, Daniel said gently. That she wants us to be a real family. She said that having you and me both happy would make her happy too. She's given us her blessing, Emily. The only question is whether you're ready to take that leap. Emily thought about Rose's words about fear and courage. She thought about the past few months, about how this family had become hers without her even realizing it. She thought about Sophie's laughter, and Daniel's rare smiles and the way this cold, beautiful house had become home. And she thought about the alternative, walking away, playing it safe, protecting herself from potential pain by guaranteeing loneliness. I'm terrified, she said again. But I'm more terrified of losing you both. So yes, I want this. I want us. I want to be part of this family, really part of it. Daniel's smile was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. Can I kiss you now? Because I've been wanting to do that for months and the waiting is torture. Emily laughed, a sound of pure joy and relief, and nodded. When Daniel's lips met hers, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them aware that this was a threshold they were crossing. But then Emily wound her arms around his neck, and Daniel pulled her closer. And the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of longing, of careful restraint finally released, of two people finding exactly where they belonged. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. Court you properly, take things slow, let Sophie adjust to the shift. I want to marry you someday, Emily Walker. Want to make you Sophie's mother in every way that matters. But I want to make sure we do this at the right pace for everyone. That sounds perfect, Emily said, meaning it. She wasn't in a rush. She had time now, had the promise of a future, had everything she'd been too afraid to reach for. They stayed there in the study talking for hours after that first kiss, making plans, discussing boundaries, figuring out how to navigate this new reality. They agreed to tell Sophie together in the morning, to be honest with her about their feelings, while reassuring her that nothing about her place in their lives would change. They talked about Emily enrolling in the child development courses Judge Reynolds had recommended, about potentially formalizing Emily's role as Sophie's legal guardian alongside Daniel. They talked about taking things slow, about dating properly even though they lived in the same house, about building a foundation that would last. When Emily finally went to her room, it was past midnight, but she felt wide awake, buzzing with the joy and terror of new beginnings. She checked on Sophie one more time, finding the girl sleeping peacefully, Mr. Whiskers tucked under her chin. Emily smoothed her hair back gently and Sophie stirred. Emily? She mumbled, not quite awake. I'm here, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. Did Dad make you leave? Because of what I said to the judge? Sophie's eyes fluttered open, suddenly anxious. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, understanding immediately. Sophie had told the judge she wanted Emily and Daniel to be together, had essentially admitted she hoped they'd become a real family. Now she was afraid her honesty had backfired. No, baby, I'm not going anywhere. Your dad and I were just talking about everything that happened today. Are you mad at me for telling the judge I wanted you to stay forever? Emily's heart clenched. I could never be mad at you for that. You were brave and honest, and I'm so proud of you. Sophie sat up, rubbing her eyes. I told the judge something else too. Something I didn't tell you or Dad yet. What's that? I told her that sometimes I see you and Dad looking at each other when you think I'm not watching. And that it makes me happy, seeing you both smile like that. I told her I want you to be my real mom, and for Dad to be happy again, and for us to all be together like a normal family. Sophie's lower lip trembled. Was that wrong? Did I mess everything up? Emily pulled Sophie into her arms, holding her close. You didn't mess anything up. You told the truth about what you want, and that's always okay. And Sophie, can I tell you a secret? Sophie pulled back to look at her, nodding. Your dad and I do care about each other. We were trying to be careful and not rush into anything because we wanted to make sure you were okay with it. But if you're really truly okay with the idea of us maybe becoming more than just your dad and your caregiver, then we'd like to try, slowly, carefully making sure you're comfortable with every step. Sophie's face lit up like Christmas morning. Really, you mean it? You and Dad are going to be together. We're going to try, Emily said, laughing at Sophie's enthusiasm. But that doesn't change anything about you and me, okay? I'm still going to be here for you, still going to read you stories and paint with you and chase away the nightmares. You're still my #1 priority. But now you'll be happy too, Sophie said with childlike wisdom. And Dad will be happy. And we'll all be happy together. That's the plan, Emily agreed, hoping desperately that they could make it true. The next morning, Daniel joined them for breakfast as usual, but there was a new ease in his movements, a lightness that hadn't been there before. Sophie kept grinning at both of them, clearly delighted by the secret she now shared. Emily had worried that telling Sophie might be awkward, but the girl had already figured everything out on her own and given her wholehearted approval. Over the following weeks, they settled into a new normal. Daniel started coming home earlier, planning family dinners and weekend outings. They went to the zoo, to the aquarium, took a weekend trip to the coast where Sophie collected shells and built sandcastles, while Emily and Daniel walked the beach together, hands intertwined, stealing kisses when Sophie was distracted by the waves. Catherine's supervised visits began, and while they were strained at first, slowly something shifted. Catherine seemed genuinely committed to respecting Sophie's boundaries, to not pushing too hard or expecting too much. She brought art supplies instead of expensive toys, suggested activities Sophie actually enjoyed, rather than what Catherine thought a child should want. Sophie remained cautious, but Emily could see tiny cracks forming in the wall she'd built against her mother. Emily started her child development courses and discovered she loved the formal learning, the theories that explained what she'd been doing instinctively. She made friends in her classes, other caregivers who understood the unique challenges of loving children who weren't biologically theirs. She felt herself growing, expanding into a version of herself she'd never known existed. Rose visited weekly, and Emily could see the satisfaction in her grandmother's eyes every time she watched Emily, Daniel, and Sophie together. You chose brave, Rose told her one afternoon while they were baking cookies with Sophie. I'm proud of you, girl. 3 months after the custody hearing, Daniel proposed, not with a grand gesture or public display, but on an ordinary Tuesday evening after Sophie had gone to bed. They were in the kitchen, Emily washing dishes while Daniel dried, comfortable in the mundane domesticity of the moment. Marry me, he said suddenly, and Emily almost dropped the plate she was holding. What? Daniel set down the dish towel and pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. I had this whole plan, he admitted. A romantic dinner, perfect setting, prepared speech. But standing here doing dishes with you, I realized this is what I want for the rest of my life. The ordinary moments, the everyday beauty of just being together. So marry me, Emily Walker. Make this official. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to us. The ring was beautiful but not ostentatious, a simple diamond that caught the light. Emily looked at it, then at Daniel's face, seeing love and hope and the promise of forever. Yes, she said, laughing through sudden tears. Yes, of course, yes. When they told Sophie the next morning, she shrieked with joy and insisted on calling Rose immediately to share the news. Rose cried happy tears over the phone, telling Emily that her grandfather would have loved Daniel, would have been so pleased to see Emily so happy. They decided on a small wedding, just family and close friends, in the garden of the mansion that had become home. 6 months after the proposal, on a perfect spring day with cherry blossoms falling like snow, Emily walked down an aisle of white chairs to where Daniel and Sophie waited. Sophie was the flower girl, taking her job with utmost seriousness, and when Emily reached the front, Sophie took both their hands, joining them together. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They wrote their own vows, Daniel promising to cherish Emily, to never take her for granted, to build a life of ordinary moments and extraordinary love. Emily promised to be his partner, his support to continue showing up every single day for him and for Sophie. And then Sophie surprised them both by pulling out her own paper with carefully written words. "I want to make promises too," Sophie said, her voice steady despite nervous trembling. "Emily, I promise to be the best daughter I can be, to listen when you talk, to try new things even when they're scary, and to always remember that you chose to love me even when you didn't have to. Dad, I promise to remember that you're doing your best, and to tell you when I need you instead of keeping it inside. And I promise that our family is going to be happy, because we all chose each other." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even Catherine, sitting in the back row as per Sophie's invitation, wiped at her tears. When the officiant pronounced Daniel and Emily married, Sophie threw her arms around both of them, and they held each other as a family, complete at last. The reception was joyful and full of laughter. Rose danced with Daniel, whispering something in his ear that made him smile and nod seriously. Emily's old friends from her previous life mingled with Daniel's business associates, the barriers between their different worlds dissolving in celebration. Sophie stayed up past her bedtime, spinning in her fancy dress until she was dizzy, secure in the knowledge that both her parents would be there to catch her if she fell. Late in the evening, Emily found herself alone for a moment on the terrace, looking out over the garden lit with strings of lights. Daniel joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "Incredibly," Emily said, leaning back into his embrace. "I keep thinking about that day in the park when I found Sophie. If I'd walked a different path, if I'd been 5 minutes earlier or later, none of this would have happened. But you didn't walk a different path," Daniel said. "You walked exactly the path that led you to us, and we're never letting you go." Sophie appeared then, tugging on Emily's dress. "Come dance with me, Mom." Mom. The word Emily had been too afraid to claim, the title she'd earned through love rather than biology. Emily looked at Daniel, saw the emotion in his eyes matching her own, then took Sophie's hand. "Let's dance," she said, and let her daughter lead her back into the celebration, into the life she'd been brave enough to choose, into the family she'd found in the most unexpected way. As she spun Sophie around the dance floor, Emily sent a silent thank you to whatever force had guided her steps that day in Discovery Park, to the courage she'd found to stay when leaving would have been easier, to the love that had grown in the spaces between fear and hope. This was her family now, chosen and cherished and worth every moment of uncertainty it had taken to get here. 2 years after the wedding, Emily stood in Sophie's room watching her daughter sleep. Daughter. The word still filled her with wonder, even though the adoption had been finalized a year ago, even though Sophie called her mom without hesitation now, even though legally and in every way that mattered, Sophie was hers. Emily touched the small swell of her belly, still not quite believing that in 6 months, Sophie would have a baby brother or sister. They'd told Sophie last week, and the girl had been ecstatic, already planning how she'd teach the baby everything she knew, already protective of the sibling she hadn't yet met. Life had settled into a beautiful rhythm. Emily had completed her certification and now worked part-time at a non-profit, helping other foster and adoptive families navigate the challenges of building non-traditional families. Daniel had scaled back his work hours, learning the lesson that success meant nothing if you weren't present for the people you loved. They'd bought a smaller house, something cozier and more suited to family life, though they still visited the mansion occasionally since Daniel kept it as his office headquarters. Catherine had become a steady, if peripheral, presence in Sophie's life. The supervised visits had gradually expanded to monthly outings, then to Catherine attending school events and Sophie's art shows. The relationship would never be what it once was, but it had transformed into something honest and healing. Catherine had even attended Emily and Daniel's wedding, had hugged Emily afterward and whispered, "Thank you for loving her the way she deserves." It had been a moment of grace that Emily cherished. Rose had moved into a small cottage on their property, close enough for daily visits, but with her independence intact. She spent her days gardening and baking with Sophie, telling stories about Emily's childhood, being the grandmother Sophie had never known. Her presence had completed their family in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. Tonight was special, though. It was the anniversary of the day Emily had found Sophie in Discovery Park, and they decided to visit the park together as a family to acknowledge where their story had begun. Sophie had been excited all day, insisting on bringing Mr. Whiskers, who was now threadbare but still beloved. They arrived at the park at sunset, the same golden hour when Emily had been walking alone 2 years ago, exhausted and hopeless, not knowing her life was about to change forever. Sophie ran ahead to the bench where Emily had found her, touching it reverently like a memorial to who she'd been. "I remember being so scared," Sophie said, when Emily and Daniel caught up to her. "I remember thinking no one was ever going to find me, that I'd be alone forever. But I did find you," Emily said, pulling Sophie close. "Or maybe you found me. I'm still not sure which." "Both," Sophie decided. "We found each other." They walked to the lookout point, the three of them watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Daniel's arm was around Emily's shoulders, Sophie pressed against her side, and Emily felt the baby flutter inside her, a reminder of the future still unfolding. "Can I tell you something?" Sophie said suddenly, looking up at Emily with those serious eyes that still held echoes of the frightened child she'd been. "I used to wish my real mom hadn't left. I used to think that if she'd just stayed, everything would be perfect. But now I think maybe things happened the way they were supposed to. Because if she hadn't left, you wouldn't have found me. And I wouldn't have you as my mom." Emily's throat tightened with emotion. "Sophie, you know that Catherine loves you too, right? In her own way, even when she was struggling." "I know," Sophie said with the wisdom of a child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. "And I don't hate her anymore. I understand that she was sad and confused and made bad choices. But you, Emily, you made the choice to stay even when things were hard. Even when I wouldn't talk to you. Even when I was mean sometimes, even when everything was complicated. You stayed, and that's what makes you my real mom. Not biology, choice." Daniel pulled them both into his arms, and they stood there as a family. 3 people who'd been broken in different ways and had somehow managed to heal each other. The sunset painted them in gold, and Emily thought about all the unlikely turns that had brought them to this moment. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, walking this same path, so tired she could barely see straight, so focused on survival that she'd forgotten to hope for anything more. She thought about Daniel, trapped in his mansion with a daughter he couldn't reach, building walls to protect himself from more pain. She thought about Sophie, sitting behind that bench with her stuffed rabbit, having already decided at 7 years old that trust was too dangerous. And she thought about how one moment, one choice to stop and help a crying child, had unraveled all their careful defenses and rebuilt them into something stronger, something real. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked softly. "About how lucky we are," Emily said. "About how easily this could have gone differently. What if I'd walked a different path that day? What if I'd been too tired to stop? What if Sophie hadn't accepted the cookie?" "But you did stop," Daniel said. "And Sophie did accept. And every day since then we've all kept choosing each other. That's not luck, Emily, that's love." As they walked back to the car, Sophie between them holding both their hands, Emily felt a sense of completion. Her life hadn't turned out anything like she'd planned, but it had turned out so much better. She'd learned that family wasn't just about blood or legal documents. It was about showing up, about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, about loving through the fear and uncertainty and complicated messiness of real life. The next morning, Emily woke to find Sophie's small form curled against her, having climbed into bed sometime during the night. Daniel was on Sophie's other side, all of them tangled together, and Emily lay there listening to them breathe, feeling the baby move inside her, and thought that this ordinary moment of messy hair and rumpled sheets and bodies pressed close was everything she'd never known she needed. Later that day there was a knock at the door. Emily opened it to find a young woman standing on the porch, probably early 20s, with a baby on her hip and exhaustion written in every line of her face. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said, her voice shaking. "But I heard you help families. I heard you understand what it's like when things fall apart, and you don't know how to put them back together. I'm Sarah, and this is Emma, and I need help. I don't know where else to go." Emily looked at this stranger, at the fear and hope warring in her eyes, at the baby who watched her with solemn attention, and felt something shift inside her. This was why she did the work she did now, why she'd turned her own struggle into purpose. because she remembered what it felt like to be desperate, to be drowning, to need someone to throw you a lifeline. "Come in," Emily said, stepping back to let them enter. "Let's figure this out together." As Sarah and her baby crossed the threshold, Sophie appeared from the kitchen, curious about their visitor. She looked at the baby, then at Sarah's tired face, then at Emily with understanding beyond her years. "Are you going to help her?" Sophie asked Emily quietly. "Yes," Emily said. "We're going to help her." "Good," Sophie said, and took Sarah's free hand with the natural kindness of a child who'd been helped herself and wanted to pay it forward. "Don't worry. Emily's really good at helping people. She helped me when I was lost, and now I'm not lost anymore." As Emily led Sarah into the living room, as Daniel came to offer coffee, and Rose appeared with fresh-baked cookies, as Sophie entertained baby Emma with Mr. Whiskers, Emily felt the circle complete. She'd been saved by kindness in a park 2 years ago, and now she got to be the one offering that same kindness to someone else who needed it. That night, after Sarah and Emma had left with resources and appointments, and the promise that Emily would help them navigate the systems designed to support struggling families, Emily sat in Sophie's room for their nightly story time. Instead of reading from a book, Emily decided to tell Sophie a story. The true story of a woman who'd been so tired she could barely stand, who'd found a little girl behind a bench, and how that one moment of choosing kindness had changed everything. Sophie listened raptly, even though she knew the story, had lived it. When Emily finished, Sophie was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Mum," she said finally, using the title that still made Emily's heart swell every time, "do you think that's why you found me? So that later you could help other people like Sarah? Like everything that happened to us was meant to prepare us to help others?" Emily considered the question seriously. "I don't know if things are meant to be, sweetheart, but I do think we can choose to take the hard things we've been through and turn them into something good. We can choose to let our pain make us kinder, not harder. We can choose to reach out when we see someone struggling, because we remember what it felt like to struggle." "Then I'm glad all the bad stuff happened," Sophie said, her voice small but certain, "because it brought us together, and now we get to help other people find their families too." Emily kissed Sophie's forehead, turned off the light and left her daughter to sleep, secure in the knowledge that she was loved and safe and home. Downstairs, Daniel was waiting with 2 cups of tea and that smile that still made Emily's heart skip. "Another family saved?" he asked, pulling her down onto the couch beside him. "Another family given a chance," Emily corrected. "They'll do the saving themselves. We're just showing them it's possible." They sat in comfortable silence, Daniel's hand resting on Emily's belly, feeling their baby move. Emily thought about the journey they'd all taken, the unexpected path that had led them here. She thought about Catherine, hopefully finding her own peace. She thought about Rose, who'd taught her that brave choices were worth making. She thought about Sophie, sleeping upstairs, no longer the frightened child behind the bench, but a confident, kind girl who knew she was loved. And she thought about herself, no longer the exhausted woman walking through a park with no hope for anything better. She'd learned that life rarely went according to plan, but that sometimes the unplanned paths led to destinations more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. "I love you," she told Daniel. The words simple but weighted with everything they'd overcome. "I love you too," he replied, pulling her closer. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing Sophie, for seeing us, for choosing to stay even when it was hard. Thank you for letting me in," Emily said, "for trusting me with your daughter, with your heart, with your life." They sat there as evening deepened into night. 2 people who'd been lost and had found their way to each other through the most unlikely circumstances, through a scared child and a tired woman, and a moment of kindness in a park. Their story hadn't been easy or simple or straightforward, but it had been real and it had been theirs, and it had been worth every moment of fear and uncertainty and doubt. Upstairs, Sophie slept peacefully, dreaming of the baby brother or sister who would soon join their family, of helping other lost children find their way home, of all the stories still to be written in the life she'd been given. Mr. Whiskers sat on her nightstand, watching over her, a reminder of the girl she'd been and the woman she was becoming. And in the morning, they would wake up together as a family, would face whatever challenges came their way, would continue choosing each other day after day, moment by moment, building a life out of love and trust, and the simple, profound act of showing up. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better, a real beginning, full of possibility and promise, and the kind of love that grew stronger through adversity rather than breaking under its weight. Emily Walker Harrison, formerly just Emily Walker, exhausted caregiver and lost soul, now mother and wife and helper of struggling families, closed her eyes and felt truly at peace. She'd found what she hadn't known she was looking for that day in Discovery Park. She'd found her purpose, her family, her home. And she'd learned the most important lesson of all, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stay, that the most profound acts of love are the ones repeated daily in small, unglamorous ways. And that family isn't about where you come from, but about who chooses to walk beside you through life, no matter how difficult the path. Dear listeners, we hope Emily, Daniel, and Sophie's story has touched your hearts. This journey reminds us that families are built not just through biology, but through the brave choice to stay, to love, and to show up even when it's difficult. Their story shows us that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin in the most unexpected moments, when we choose kindness even when we're exhausted, when we choose vulnerability even when we're scared, and when we choose love even when it seems impossibly complicated. If this story resonated with you, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories, exploring the complexity of family, love, and second chances. You can find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a like. Every day we bring unique stories that delve into the beautiful messiness of real life and real relationships. Share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear about your own unexpected journeys to finding family. Thank you for spending this time with us, and remember that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never saw coming. We hope to see you in our next story.